Hi, I'm Keith McCullough, and welcome back to our book club. Today what I wanted to do was give you an insight into a book that I've been highlighting recently in my morning early looks. So my early look, it's my daily strategy note. I'm constantly focused on what I'm reading about. So again, I'm constantly focused on educating myself. Every 10 days, I'd like to read a new book. And what I try to focus on are the three big pillars of my interests. Number one, as you can see in the process, is math. Number two is behavioral. And number three is history. Now this book, Destined for War, is clearly a history book. It's a geopolitical history book that is written by one of the most important living Harvard historians. His name is Graham Allison, and he really tags along one of the other important books that I've read that I've highlighted in recent notes called The Clash of Civilizations. So again, this book is really important to use right now when you consider the risks associated with China. The risks associated with Trump in China, or Obama in China, or whoever the next president may be in China. Don't forget that China is not going away. Now, the goal of finding a book that says destined for war isn't to scare the hell out of you. Now again, you can go on many websites that get paid on you clicking. Again, it's called clickbait for a reason. They scare the hell out of you. You click on it, they get paid. I don't do that, okay? So at the end of the day, that's their business, that's what they do, they're biased, you understand that. What I'm trying to do is contextualize a really big topic. And this topic is really interesting. It really characterizes rivals versus rising powers versus the establishment. So again, these are the big things that matter in this book. And again, you have one of the world's most important historians really characterizing the world in that context. So first, the first part of the book, like I said, if you jump right in, the preface has to do with this rising versus ruling power. So again, rising versus ruling power. So again, the metaphor is to use what he calls Thucydides Trap. It might sound like a mouthful, but at the end of the day, that was Athens versus Sparta. So again, he's pinning USA versus China, with China, of course, being the rising power and the US being the ruling power. So again, Athens being the rising power and Sparta being the ruling power. So again, this is the setup that he gives you effectively. Then he digs right in part one, and he contextualizes why China matters. And I think that that's a really important part of the book, if only by virtue of its data. If you go right away, like really on page 9, he gives you where the tilt of Chinese economic power is going to be by the year 2024 versus where it is currently. Now, the year 2024 isn't that long away, and that's really, for me, an important point of contextualization is as we accelerate in rate of change terms in terms of Chinese GDP growth and global economic and, again, geopolitical power, what does the world potentially look like, and what are their intentions versus what ours might be, or what we think theirs might be. Third part of the book, which grinds right into it after contextualizing what's going on in China, is really 500 years. Okay, so if I have a criticism for this book, it would be that if you don't know anything about history, this might be a bit too much to bite into right off the bat. Again, he basically says, you know, in 500 years, there have been 16 major conflicts, or the potential for 16 major conflicts, where 12 have actually resulted in war. So again, the rising rises up to the ruling, and 12 of 16 in the last 500 years end in war. And he goes through them pretty quickly, but again, if you're not familiar with the subject matter, it's a real important read to contextualize what are the behavioral factors that got the ruling power or the rising power to act the way that they did. And again, what you'll learn, as many things in life are, a lot of nonlinear behavior were really the tipping points to what ultimately happened. Now, some quotes, what I'd say, well, some of the most interesting quotes of the book, I want to read one passage, has to do with where I actually learned the most from this chapter. It's chapter 6, which really the question is, who is Xi Jinping? So again, at the end of the day, if you don't know who that is, you need to know that. Obviously, he is the predominant leader, the one with the most power, the man who is running China at this point. And really, on page 113, this excerpt right here on who is Xi Jinping. I think this is a really interesting one. If you didn't know, now you're going to know. Destined to grow up in Beijing's cradle of leaders, Xi woke up shortly after his 9th birthday in 1962 to discover that a paranoid Mao had arrested his father. In the days that followed, his father was humiliated and eventually imprisoned for the duration of the Cultural Revolution. During what Xi described himself as a dystopian period in his life, Red Guards repeatedly forced him to denounce his own father. When his school closed, Xi spent his days defending himself, fighting in the streets, and stealing books from shuttered libraries to try to educate himself. Sent to the countryside by Mao to be re-educated, Xi found himself living in a cave in a rural village. Ugh. Did you know? Well, if you didn't know, now you know. Like I said, very different upbringing than Mr. Trump or Mr. Obama, depending on your political proclivities. I don't particularly care about. What I'm trying to tell you is that everyone in this world is different. So understanding their history, empathizing with their history, understanding what they might think about doing versus what you might think you should do. Very different things. So again, this I think it gave me, like most books do, it gave me an education on who this guy is and where he's coming from, which I think is absolutely critical. Now finally, as I pointed out, Samuel Huntington. So again, he wrote The Clash of Civilizations. He is also a Harvard historian. So again, if there's another criticism, it's that it's all about Harvard guys. Obviously, that can't be the way that the world is educated all the time, but these are very thoughtful people that have written very important books. And Samuel Huntington, as I pointed out, it's a book you should be reading. It's called The Clash of Civilizations. But here's a quote from Samuel Huntington that Graham Allison uses to really start chapter 7, which is an important chapter that summarizes the Clash of Civilizations. And by the way, that's a long read and it's really boring. So if you want to just get the summary notes, Graham Allison did a great job summarizing his colleagues' notes. It is my hypothesis that the fundamental source of conflict in this new world will not be primarily ideological or economic. The great divisions among humankind will be cultural. The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics. So that's a great quote, if only because it's dead on. And guess when Samuel Huntington wrote that? 1993, okay? 1993, that was a long time ago. And in the halls of history or in my day job where we're supposed to make big calls, that was a huge call. At the end of the day, I'm not here to make huge calls like that. I'm not your ideologue. I'm not your political person. What I'm trying to do is really not scare the hell out of you, first of all, help contextualize history within the history that we've already learned, and then maybe taking today and tomorrow and the day after that as an opportunity to have a pretty good handle on where the world might go. So again, you have to empathize with other people's point of view. Obviously, the Chinese have a very different point of view than an American point of view or a Canadian point of view, for that matter. And this is why we read history, so that we get a scenario analysis. This is, again, this book, it's a scenario analysis. It's not a certainty. It's saying this has happened before. History is not always the same, but there are rhymes to history. That's why I read history, and you got to read the good history, because some history is not so good as this. Destined for War, great book. You should read it.